Good morning. This is Democratic Business Council's webinar series. I see the participants are filing into the series, so we'll give a few seconds to let everyone get into the webinar, but we are excited this morning to have two special guests with us. So we will hold for about 30 seconds and then start. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started this morning as people continue to join us. I know folks are joining us live, and also this is recorded, so you'll be able to watch it online as well. But welcome to the Democratic Business Council's webinar series, which we obviously started during COVID. It has remained popular for business leaders throughout Virginia and now across the country. So we are thrilled to continue this series. My name is Lindsay Davis Stover, and I'm excited to have two very special guests join us this morning. First, James Carville, Democratic strategist, advisor to President Clinton's 1992 presidential campaign, a Marine veteran, and a proud LSU Tiger. And Bradley Beychok, a co-founder and president of American Bridge 21st Century, and also, I know, a proud LSU Tiger. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us.
Go Tigers.
Well, I have to say, I am an admirer of you both and very grateful for all that you have done. In fact, James, my father used to say he had two heroes, James Carville and Willie Nelson. So you were in good company at our house. But I have to say, it pains me as a Baylor Bear to be reminded this morning that LSU stole our great coach, Kim Mulkey, three-time national championship. So I will do my best to get over that this morning.
Right.
She did great things at Baylor, so I know she will do even greater things at LSU.
I don't want to.
For those of you joining us, please know that you can submit questions for Bradley and James to address live during the webinar series. We have also had a flood of questions come in prior to the series. So if you would like to submit your question, please open up the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, submit your question, and I will do my best to have it answered by these two gentlemen during our web series. I'm going to start out with a question that we received overwhelmingly as we were leading up to this webinar series, and I'm sure you can both guess that it had to do with the pending Supreme Court decision. And so I'd like to just start out with that because I know it's on the hearts and minds of so many people, and would love to get both of your take on what will be the political impact of this. Will it motivate voters? Will it be a factor in the upcoming elections? James, you want to kick us off?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank everybody. And just so you know, Coach Mulkey is from Tickfaw, Louisiana, so she had to come home. You can't. Once you live in Tickfaw, you can't get very far away from it.
I can appreciate that.
You know, what's been interesting has been a friend of mine did a bunch of focus groups right after it, and people say this is unthinkable. They can't believe they actually did this. And in fact, some of the Republicans are saying it's fake news. They just leaked this. This is not real. But of course, it is real. And one of the effects of it is going to be that people will be willing to believe anything now. I mean, here's a 50-year right that the public supports by over 2-1, and they did that. What else would they not do? So this, I think this sort of compromises their political immune system somewhat. And you need to have an opportunity to leverage that into something else, but it makes other attacks more believable. There's this, and generally people, one of the things that people say in politics is that they don't say what they're going to do. Actually, more often than not, they say exactly what they're going to do. They say, if we want to cut Social Security, that's what they tried to do. They said, well, nobody's going to do that. Oh yeah, Bush tried to do that in 2005. All right, they're going to kick 25 million people off of health insurance. Yeah, they voted like 19 times to do that. So we've got to use this and I think and grow it into something bigger, because I do think people just can't believe that something that's been here this long, that has this overwhelming support, that they would take that away. And it's got to have some effect.
It does. Bradley, that's a really good point. It's hard to believe, right? And I think in so many ways, people are shocked by it and don't believe that it possibly could happen, right? And can you talk a little bit about the impact that this has and how we should continue to educate voters on the impact it will have in their lives?
Yeah, I think part of this comes from the Trump presidency, where, as James sort of said, where people they ascribe the word fake news or something. There's a lot of conspiracies, the growth of QAnon, these things they come into question. It's hard to question a leaked opinion for the Supreme Court, as there's been a cadence to get to this point. And so I think that the way that this can help Democrats energize is that, look, we talk about Texas and Baylor, James talks about Louisiana, I'm in Virginia today, like many of you. When it's not in your backyard, it doesn't feel as real. And then when it comes from the Supreme Court and, you see it happen in Texas or it happens in other states and you're like, well, that couldn't happen here. And just like James said, oh yeah, it can. And it will very quickly. And so I think that the more real and, the more simple that we keep things to voters, taking away a fundamental 50-year right, the better. And look, they heard it. James and I were talking yesterday. If you look at a Monmouth poll about national issues that are on voters' minds this year, 34% people thought about the economy, obviously, which makes sense. 33% talk about abortion and reproductive rights. So it is shot up there instantly. And I think it'll be the forefront in the next 160 some odd days.
Absolutely. Well, I know that we three are parents of daughters. So I want to ask you to take off your political hat for a moment and put on your dad hat. And as I expect, had some pretty tough conversations with your daughters. I've had with mine, who are just 10 and 12. And talk a little bit about what this means to you as a father, raising daughters and knowing that things change dramatically for them.
Well, you tell us question spot on. My daughter's soon to be 28 and just made 24. And I got screaming, yelling, I can't believe this. I'm not, I don't care what you say. I went to LSU. I'm not raising my daughters in a state where they're second-class citizens. And my oldest daughter's married, and she's in graduate school in Baton Rouge. And the first thing I did is, she must get pregnant, just get her a lawyer. Because pregnancies are not a straight line operation, all right? And they're going to be, more often than people like to think, you have to make some complicated decisions. I don't know if it's vitro they've tried to pass a law, voted out of committee to take a 20-year-old frightened female and send her to state prison for 25 years and charge her with homicide. I mean, that, and again, people say, oh no, they'd never do that. Yes, they will. They will do that. They just did it and they tried to do it. And, we have a sane governor, who kind of derailed it for now. In Mississippi, they're talking about getting rid of contraception. So how insane is this? You got the poorest state in the country, you outlaw contraception and you outlaw abortion. What are you going to end up with? Unwanted children. It's not going to turn out well at all. In Oklahoma, if it's a mother of the fetus, if you choose the mother, then the mother goes to jail. I'm not making this up. It sounds so insane that people kind of don't want to believe it, but it's right in front of you. It's right in front of you. And of course, the upshot of it all is affluent people, well, we'll get a lawyer and we'll do something else. But, 80% of the people don't have that option. And we're just oblivious to the kind of lies that they're leading. I mean, it's insane. And as well, it's not enumerated in the Constitution. How can you have a right that's not enumerated? Well, the right to have sex is not enumerated in the Constitution. The right to get married is not enumerated in the Constitution. There's nothing in there. When the Constitution was ratified, legally, I don't think women even existed. I mean, maybe they could inherit, but they couldn't do much else.
Right.
And so it's the idea that we're living in a bubble from 1789. The only thing we know about that time is, according to at least Trump, they had airports, because in the Revolution it was storming airports. But other than that, it was kind of backwards.
That's right. It's tough. Bradley, as a father, and I know your daughter's younger too, what kind of conversations did you have in your house about this?
We didn't have conversations. My daughter's 6, so it's a little early. A little early for that in my end. I think in our house, as she gets older, it is a tough conversation. We live in Northern Virginia, like many of you. The toughest conversation I've had with my daughter was after Clinton lost in 2016. I took her to go vote on that Tuesday. I got home that night at 3 a.m, not thinking it was really real. And James and I've done this. He's done it a lot longer than me, which I like to remind him. But I woke up the next day, and it was the first time in my 20 years of doing this that it felt different. And it felt different because I had a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old on my hands. And so it hits closer to home, when you have something that lives in your house that it can affect, as everyone knows here, I'm sure, with many of you with kids.
Yeah.
It was not so much a conversation. They were yelling at me. And then my daughters think I'm omnipotent. All right. And it's, Dad, you have to fix this now. I know you can fix this. I said, no, Dad, I can't fix this. You can't. You can get us a table in any restaurant. You got to be able to fix this.
That's right. But as we all know, as parents, you want to fix it, right?
Yeah, I would love to fix it, but
it's tough. I was having this conversation with my 12-year-old daughter, and like you, Bradley, when Clinton lost and we had to break that news, there were lots of tears in our house. Even as young as they were, they understood what it meant. And I was so taken with my 12-year-old, because first thing she said is, what are they going to do? Take away our books next? Our right to education? And here she just went on with this list. And as a 12-year-old, understood. And I thought, we've got to be more present to what this means, that this just isn't about abortion. This is much bigger, right? And we have to make sure that we do what we can.
By the way, just take your books away, just so you know, the Supreme Court said that Texas doesn't want to comply with the mandate to have compulsory public education. So really, they're really talking about taking books away. That's exactly what they're doing. The governor of Texas says he doesn't want to comply with mandatory public education for children. So it's not a great fear. And don't think they won't do it.
That's right.
Don't think they won't do it, because they will.
That's right. And, it's good. I'm raising my kids in Northern Virginia, and it's important that we get out of this little bubble too, and understand outside the Beltway, right? How this is having real implications in people's lives, and making sure they recognize that. Mm-hmm. Which takes me to the next topic that we received an overwhelming amount of questions on. I just would like to remind everyone joining us live, if you would like to submit a question, please type it into the Q&A box, and I will do my best to get it answered this morning. but I had the honor and privilege of serving as former Congressman Chet Edwards' chief of staff for many years. And I know Chet is joining us on the web series this morning. And James, the question that he submitted, I think you'll really enjoy, is that after the 1994 elections, President Clinton gave him the best political advice he ever received, which was the problem with Democrats is we don't understand the difference between an issue and a message. 28 years later, I wonder if Democrats still haven't learned that lesson. In 2022, what should Democrats' message be to everyday voters on two questions? Why should I vote for Democrats? And why should I vote against Republicans?
I guess if everybody's wait. Thank you, Bradley.
Yeah. Look,
I think what what has to happen between now and November is the way these elections go. If people say, if I'm dissatisfied, then I'm going to vote against the party in power, is the only thing I know is a person to express my dissatisfaction. If that is the mindset in November, the Democrats are going to lose. All right. However, if you say, well, I have something to lose here, and this is where this abortion decision has some merit politically. All right. You know, the job market is still blazingly hot. I mean, if anything, it's too hot. People have more in savings now than they had before. And so if they go in thinking they have a free vote to just, just to hell with it, I'll vote against all of them, that's going to produce one result. But if they go in and they say, well, I wish things were a little better, but let's face it, they could get worse. So I don't want to change. And so that's a difficult thing, but you're going to get more and more things that are going to come your way that will illustrate this. I mean, that's the hope. Look, if inflation is still running at 8.3%, you're going to lose anyway. All right. My advice is act like you know what's doing, act like it's going to come down. If it comes down, take credit for it. But if you just give people a free vote and says, you like this or you want something different, well, they'll say I want something different. But if you say you don't like this, but you have something to lose, which is demonstrably true, which we should be able to articulate. I mean, the Rick Scott stuff is just a gift to everybody, and we need to exploit that. And the one thing they'll say, so you hear people in the commentary say, well, no, they're really not going to do that. That's insane. He is the head of the Senate campaign committee. The Club for Growth has been for this forever. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars. They're going to liable to elect this woman in Pennsylvania that no one's ever heard of. Anytime that you hear, anytime a Democrat or anybody says, oh, they'd never do that. That's, oh yeah, they will. Oh yes, don't kid yourself. They just did it. So I think that the key part is to tell people, to convince people that you have something to lose. And that will stem the bleeding. But then it's not the most effective messaging you have, but it's a pretty good message for this day. Because Michigan, they always say, we're not saying what Mitch McConnell says, we'll do what we do after we take the Senate or House back. So you got to tell people what it is they're going to try to do.
James and I talk about this a lot, that one problem with Democrats, I think, that we agree upon is that we moan and groan about what we haven't gotten done. And we don't tend to promote and sell what we have gotten done. And so acknowledging that gas prices are high, that inflation is faster than people wanted, we've done a pretty poor job of selling the success of this administration so far. We always have this issue. And so I think for us, one, you have to localize these things. So whether you're localizing the fear, as James just talked about, of what people are doing on reproductive rights in other states so that people know it can happen, that's one way. The other way to localize something is to stop talking in trillions of dollars and start showing what that means for people in a community, whether it's the child tax care piece, whether it's infrastructure things that are getting built. Today there's a huge announcement from the Biden administration, $45 billion for broadband in rural areas. across the country. So how do you go get these things, right? That's number one. Number two, we have to make sure Democrats get credit for them because it's not bipartisan. And if you stripped away the Democrat or Republican label, a lot of these things are inherently popular on their own. And then third, you have to contrast it with these Republicans, and whether that's what they're going to do or what they're not supporting or what they haven't done or how they lockstep with Trump and all his wackadoodle cronies that, you know, as the Biden said this week, I thought was actually kind of clever, the King MAGA. And so I think we got to stop moaning and groaning, start selling, and then go on offense. And fear is certainly part of that. And so if they give you something, you got to take it.
Right. Absolutely. And so many people, this is so true of Washington political types or more like staff types. Everybody wants to be in policy. No one wants to be in sales. Okay, we need a sales force. We need somebody to go door to door with some pots and pans out there, full of brush manners, anything like that. We got to sell. And, you know, that's beneath that. Some people think selling is beneath them, that you put good policy out there, and if you have good policy, that takes care of itself. Well, that's not the way the world works.
That's right, James. I just recently heard you say gloat and promote. So
gloat and promote, right.
Democrats, we've got to do that. So questions are starting to flood in, and I'll start fielding these. From Amy Bergner, what are the most impactful actions Democrats can take now to get our message out successfully and keep our majorities in House and Senate?
Well, okay, make them. Policy is not going to change much, so make them take votes that they don't want to take, just like this one to codify Rove. All right, they didn't like taking that. That was a smart thing. Bring up like child tax credits, the stuff that you know they're not going to be for, that you know is popular. There's one thing, you know, if you wanted to do something that would really improve people's lives, and you want something that would really help the labor shortage, there's something in it. I'm sure that in this audience, there are any number of people that are dealing with severe labor shortages because you just saw. What about federal daycare? You would have an explosion of women in the workforce. We now thought this kind of stuff worked, but we wasn't sure. But now we have, 30 years of research. It actually produces better outcomes. It's better nutrition. It's better learning. It's better socializing. It's better at developing children's skills. And the mother is able to work 8 hours a day. But if you make a mother choose between her child and her job, well, she's going to choose the child. Right. And the other thing is, immigration is good for this country. When I was living in Northern Virginia, I read that they had 151 different ethnic groups that went to Northern Virginia Community College. I volunteered. I taught a class there for 3 years, because if you got 151 different ethnic groups at a school, that's a James Carville kind of joint. And this was back in the earlier part of the century. And if we want to know the difference between a Sunni and a Shia Muslim, I just asked my Sunni and Shia Muslims, say, why don't y'all get up here and tell us what you're fighting about? Because I don't quite understand it. I mean, and I don't know if there's a place in the country that has benefited more from immigration than Northern Virginia. I really don't. I mean, I'm sure somebody could say, well, argue with me, there's some other place, but it is a very prosperous, very diverse, very hardworking people. And I don't think we should just say this immigration argument hurts us because people like the idea of immigration. I'm right here in New Orleans, Louisiana. If you can find a roofer that was born in the United States, I'll fall off the roof. And there's no danger of me falling off the roof, I can promise you. So, I think that there are things, and there are things that you can do, and there are votes that you can make them take, where if you go and you say, well, look at what I can see what they're not going to do when they get in office. So there's some things you can do. It's not hopeless.
That's great. Bradley, we have a lot of business leaders, obviously, in Northern Virginia joining us this morning. How can the business community better contribute to this and do what we can as business leaders in this fight as well.
Yeah, look, you've got great credentials. I mean, I think that one thing that's less partisan are business people. It's why, on the right, you have the Chamber of Commerce in some ways, but it's not even sort of right wing. You've even seen the chamber come out supportive of some of this infrastructure stuff. And that makes sense. There's some common ground. And so I think these politicians listen to the business leaders. No, not always, right? I mean, you're looking at the situation in Florida with DeSantis and Disney, which is a little ludicrous, but by and large, corporate America or business leaders are the best messengers we have in the party. Whether it's, a Fortune 500 company to a local coffee shop in a community that is employing people. If you employ people in a community, the public officials are going to listen to you. And so you have to engage. And I think the more you engage, the more successful you'll be.
Let me amplify on that. If you're a business person of any kind, and you saw what happened to Disney, Disney had a policy that the state government didn't like. So they economically punished Disney. Now think about that for a second. Just think about that for a second. That the idea that the federal government will coerce businesses that disagree with it politically. That is a hallmark of a totalitarian, authoritarian state, where if you have to march in step with the government or they will come after you. And every business person, when they're told that they're a pro-business party, say, well, what happened to Disney? They didn't like their politics, so they put $1 billion tax on them. That's what this is. And I think business people need to wake up to that. You may not like everything that Democrats are doing, but if you don't like it, they're not going to single you out and shut your business down like the Republicans.
That's a new frontier in politics. I think one thing we forget is we think about, well, everything's not going our way. Midterms are hard. We didn't get Build Back Better done. You got to flip the coin and look at what's going on the Republican side. Donald Trump is singing a song and they all have to dance to it. If they don't dance to it, he punishes them. And DeSantis is basically saying, I'm a better singer than you. But Trump was a unique political force that is a first ballot Hall of Fame of a politician. I mean, he had a Teflon that we've not seen that other politicians have. He's turned really moderate people. You look at this Pennsylvania Senate Republican primary next week. McCormick is running, used to be at Goldman Sachs 4 years ago, would have been a member of this group and probably on No Labels or at the Bipartisan Policy Center. And now he's barking the same tune as Trump. You have to, you don't have a choice. That's what Trump has brought into the system. In 2020, there were 600,000 new voters that had never voted in a presidential election before in Pennsylvania. And Republicans had an 8-point advantage with that group. He brought new people into the fold, and now you have to be singing that tune because that's what they expect. And we have to make them pay for that.
Do you see the Republicans? I mean, there have been a few, right, that have courageously stood up to Trump and courageously stood up to what happened on January 6th. Do you think, though, in general, there's going to be more courage in the Republican Party with key leaders to do that? Or do you think?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
No.
I mean, because it's just a graveyard. I mean, it's been a graveyard of folks. So you've got, look at, Liz Cheney has a lot of courage and she's taking this on, and look where she's ended up, and she's in a competitive spot. And I applaud her for it. I don't denigrate it. Larry Hogan in Maryland, our neighbor state, he'll get in the presidential race and they'll pound him into the ground.
Sure. So this is one of my kind of pet peeves. And the audience, what you're thinking is, James, yeah, but there's some of these Democrats are just damn out of their minds. I mean, they're so liberal, and they come up with all this kind of stuff and wokeness, and you're right. There are that's 11% of the Democratic Party. You can classify to in my view, is kind of being naive and borderline silly, I would say. Now, there's a difference between being naive and borderline silly and being 11%. This is according to the Pew Foundation, who does all this polling. 11% of Democrats describe themselves as progressive liberals. And out of 4 different groups of the Democratic Party, it is also, by the way, the only majority white part of the Democratic Party. This is basically overeducated white people with too much time on their hands thinking of silly shit, right? 65% of their party believes that Trump won the election. All right. 58% of their party doesn't even believe in evolution. All right. There's a difference between being silly and naive, or significant part of their party is actually pulling for Russia. That's treason. That's treason. That's not naivety. That's not being silly. All right. That's pulling against the interests of the United States. So yes, we have some crazies. It's a very small part of our party. And you have like insane evil people, which is a very large part of your party. And if you know, my daughter came and said, Dad, I have a job, I'm gonna work in AOC's congressional office. She'd say, well, you're probably gonna meet some different people, you know, that wouldn't agree with everything they do, but it's a good opportunity. You can learn a lot. If your daughter comes and says, Dad, I'm gonna go to work for Marjorie Taylor Greene, you go to the bridge and you jump because your life is over, okay? Your life is over. And it's not the same thing. And it's always, well, yeah, but I want, you're right, we do have, it's fair to say we have some kind of out there people who I think the worst characterization is they're silly and naive. But you got to admit, there's a lot more of them and they're way worse than silly and naive.
Well, that's an interesting point. Our party is diverse in that way, right? And we've seen it also play out in the Senate. And so we have gotten some questions, you know, because the Senate obviously is so important right now. It's all important, but arguably Senate is so important. You know, how as a party do we navigate the different factions of our party? Whether, you know, it's Cinema and Manchin, whether it's AOC, how as a party do we successfully navigate that and instead of letting it pull us apart?
So if you look at the Democratic Party, it's really a party of coalitions. All right. You have, you know, biggest part of, most important part of coalition, probably blacks, African Americans. All right. A significant part of coalition. Another significant part of coalition, of course, of the suburban women, educated whites, a big part. We've become education has become the big dividing line in American politics. And you have, you know, you have the Joe Manchins, you have some people are still the more moderate, more Southern centrist wing of the party. You have the AOC, the progressive Democrats, the Bernie Sanders people. I mean, so it's maintaining a coalition is it's very difficult to live in a coalition. They don't really have much of a coalition. I mean, I mean, the majority of their party are non-college whites. Unfortunately, they're very strategically located and they have to be dealt with. I mean, they had a pro-business part of their coalition, which is just been kind of shattered in the rough. There's still business people that vote for them. They think they'll cut their taxes. Isn't that much? The kind of national defense Republicans, I mean, Trump has made a mockery out of them. So their party is more driven around a person today than anything else. And we're driven by trying to maintain and expand and hold on to a coalition, which is a very messy and difficult thing to do, but it's the way that you build a country. If you don't build coalitions, you don't build a country, you don't build consensus, and you got to keep trying. And that's the real difference that I see.
Oh, it's important. You know, there's several questions here, and I'm going to kind of combine several of them so we can make sure and get them in, from Lauren Hershey and Lori Blackburn. You know, we had significant success here in Virginia, right? And in many ways kind of led, you know, after Trump was elected, we kind of led that movement back over with the elections here in Virginia and provided momentum for the rest of the country. And so many of us were, you know, punched in the stomach, quite honestly, our last election when Youngkin was elected governor. Can you talk a little bit about some of the broader lessons Virginia has provided for the country, but also here in Virginia, what can we do, right, to be that force again as we move into some really critical elections?
Okay, I'll go.
Now I'll get, look, I think, well, One, I think that you saw what Terry did when he was first governor. He was unabashedly progressive in a way, right? He's pro-business, but didn't take any squishy positions that people couldn't have said that he would have lined up pretty well with the Democratic Party. Under Northam, we had a booming economy, a lot of growth, a lot of business. It was all great. And then you get Youngkin. I think that what I would speak to is why did we get Youngkin? And to me, everything had to happen. We were very involved in Virginia. You had to not have a Republican primary. So this guy got to skate by without having to really go through any scrutiny as we're watching these bloody primaries. You have to have a self-funder. It would have been hard to compete. Number three, a self-funder 80% of the time either petters out or they rarely get better. Youngkin got better as the campaign went on. Number four, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Parents are frustrated. We all know history in Virginia that this only once had we held serve when we held power in the White House. Number five, Afghanistan happened, which is really the biggest moment of when the numbers sort of fell out. And so all of these things sort of came together. And Terry McAuliffe, who I'm sure many of you are friends with, and I was a big supporter of, and as am I, he ran a tough race. It was right after Trump. People were tired and exhausted, and we're trying to mobilize them again. But there was a hangover. And unfortunately, that hangover lasted a little too long for us. And so it's frustrating now where we made so much progress in Virginia that now we're staring down, another 3.5 years of, Youngkin was wearing that vest, and it took about 2 weeks before you realized he ripped that vest off. And as James said, they'll show you who they are. And he did really quickly as soon as he got into office. So I don't know if there's a lesson in that other than every once in a while, James and I are both degenerate gamblers, and we would say, you can't win them all, and you can't win them all. Sometimes it's a bad beat.
That's right.
Yeah.
Perfect storm came together.
Yeah. And what happened to Terry, and again, I sent out 47 emails, fundraising emails. Politico called me. I said, well, I'm an email signing slut. What do you want me to do? But again, what happened to Terry is that going through all of this turmoil in the Democratic Party and all this stuff about language and this and that, and they were willing to believe most anything about a Democrat. So Terry and Dorothy had 5 kids. I mean, the kids went to the Naval Academy, the most conscientious parents in the world, and they had people believing that Terry was going to let, I don't know what, some communists or something come in and take over the schools. And that's what happens when your immune system is down. And, the defund the police might be, the stickiest thing said in politics since it's the economy stupid. All right. People just remembered that. And unfortunately, it was very sticky and it stuck and it hurt. That environment reduces your immune system and you're really susceptible to infection. And Terry got infected and the Commonwealth got hurt. I'll say one thing. Here in Louisiana, I have a place in Shenandoah Valley for over 25 years now. And Virginia is a very prosperous place. Louisiana, unfortunately, is not near as prosperous, but you can tell the difference when the traffic in Northern Virginia is horrific, but the construction is really horrific. They're doing a lot. If you dedicate certain parts of your place to plant trees, the Commonwealth will give you huge tax breaks. And it's a state that has prosperity, and that you can just tell the difference between spending time there and spending time down here. Not that I don't love it down here, but I'm just saying Virginia is just a lot more prosperous place, and you can tell the difference.
Absolutely. And we have several issue-based questions, so I'm going to kind of lump them into one. But Paul Friedman, who is the executive director of Safer Country, and also Lauren, who's talking about immigration, talk a little bit about how Democrats need to message important issue. James, you talked about immigration, how Northern Virginia has benefited so greatly, and I couldn't agree more with immigration. And I know here there is a strong group trying to ensure that we are able to keep people safe, kids in our schools safe, right? And in terms of putting in place the right gun safety measures to move forward. Can you talk about those two issues and how we go into this election talking about those two issues?
So in messaging, you have to remember what the proper words are. People say you're conflicted about abortion. They're not very conflicted about Roe. So I always use the term Roe. All right. It just are. So if I did a poll and I said, I'm gonna list some names and tell me whether you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of them. And the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, but the Catholic Church, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the AFL-CIO, immigrants, right? The immigrants will test very, very favorably. What people don't like is disorder. And so if what they see, if disorder on the border becomes that thing that they see, then they're not going to like it. If they see Northern Virginia and they go to like Michael's in Old Town, a Italian restaurant run by an Iranian guy, okay, that they like. All right, they like Iranians having Italian restaurants. So you got to talk benefits of immigrants and what it means to the country. And I think that's a really important distinction. Talk about Roe, don't talk about abortion. All right. And by the way, if you got a mother and she walks 600 miles with a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, that's a motivated person. We might want that person in the country. Okay. Hey, come on up here. I can put you to work real fast. You took those two kids, you walked 600 miles with them to get here, and we can get daycare. And lady, we have a job for you in Northern Virginia. Let me tell you, you are one motivated person. Come right on in. And you got to make that, you got to talk about it like that. You got to talk about the humanity of it, but just the benefits, the enormous benefits that this country is reaping from immigration. And that's, again, the labor shortage. Oh my God, you want to do something about inflation? They have more people working. Guess what happens? I mean, it's not very complicated, and immigrants are a large part of that. And we have to be sure that we explain that to people and talk about it in that kind of way.
As James knows, I hate to agree with him on anything. We usually it makes me sick. He gets complimented too much. But what you heard him say, though, is exactly right. Instead of talking about a single issue or what's the policy fix or why have we gotten this bill done, what did he do? He talked about Michael at a restaurant telling a story and a narrative about immigration, a story and a narrative about gun control. If you weave it into a message, is going to be more powerful than beating people with a stick and saying, if we don't get this done, all's going to shit. And that's sometimes we have a tendency to do that. It's if we don't pass this, if you don't support this, then this is the line. Instead of sort of taking this prism of look at it through the lens of real people on how they interact in daily life and tell something that's compelling around that issue to help broaden it. And that'll make your terrain better, and it'll probably get you more support.
And by the way, the name of the restaurant is A La Lucia.
Oh, all right.
But and there's 1,000 examples of that in Northern Virginia. I mean, trust me. Or you can go to Landini's, which is actually an Italian restaurant that was founded by Italian immigrants.
Yeah.
I mean, it just, you got to remind people of it. And the other thing that I find interesting is the places that immigrants want to go, they're well liked. They're well liked in Northern Virginia. They're well liked in Houston. They're well liked in those. It's just the places they don't want to go that everybody doesn't like them. You don't have to worry. They're not going to your town in Ohio. You're safe. You're real safe. And we'll take all they got.
Well, I think both of you hit on such an important point, as making these complex issues relatable through stories. And I reference back to the question Chet Edwards, put forth in the beginning of the webinar, which was when Clinton gave him the advice of, Democrats don't know the difference between an issue and a message, right? And And I think we've got to make sure and start talking about the stories and the impact it has on people's lives, and really bring to life those stories that people relate with every single day.
So Lindsay, I'll tell you the President Clinton story, because I've been spending a little more time with him. And I already told you, boss, we had like a, I don't know, 25th reunion. And Kaya Andrews, who worked for me in the war room, and we had a line, and the president was going through, and Kaya's kind of a pushy mom, and she said, "Mr. President, this is my daughter, I don't know, Tiffany. She's 13, and she wants to be president one day. What advice do you have for her?" And he kind of looked back like that, and he took his fingers shaking, and he said 2 things: study hard and meet as many people as you can that are not like you. It's the best political advice I've ever heard.
That is very
Everybody wants to stay in their comfort zone. And I'll give you a very current example is these liberal advocacy groups, most of them are not worth the powder it takes to blow them up, because all they do is hang out with people like themselves in places where they know everybody else. So instead of going out and registering voters, or canvassing or helping, they just go protest in front of Alito's house because he lives in a prosperous place in the Washington, D.C. area. So you can feel good about yourself. You can go out and demonstrate. But, honestly, every time you turn around, these pro-life people are running somebody for the school board, they're running somebody for the state legislature, they're running people for Secretary of State. And all of these people just want to stay there with other people who went to the same colleges they did, who think like they do, and who are the same as them. And that's why they get beat, and they get beat bad, because they don't like politics. They like socializing. I'm sorry, but that's how we ended up here. We don't like to meet people that are not like us.
I think that what President Clinton said not only is great political advice, it's great life advice, right? I mean, it's so important. And you mentioned these local elections, and we have a question from Larry James, who said, "Who's the Democratic version of Karl Rove and Frank Lutz?" And I reminded me of that question because, as Karl Rove, so famously did, right, was work at the lower levels strategy wise and have the patience, right, to build that infrastructure. But can you all answer who are the Democratic versions of those 2 men?
I'm gonna turn to Bradley because he's a little younger, and people come to me and say, "Yeah, look, I'm looking for a campaign man." I said, "Man, I haven't done this stuff in 20 years. Okay, it's not like I've been out there running campaigns."
You want to sign up for a campaign this morning, then, right?
We got to be smarter, and I pointed this out. We'll give $30 million to Amy McGrath, the running in Kentucky, who never had a chance from the start. And the Republican secretaries of state have raised $33 million for their people run Secretary of State. Democrats have raised $4 million. So Democrats love on these hopeless causes. And what we have to do is be more focused on granular everyday things, and less so trying to go off on these causes that are never going to succeed anyway. But Bradley, you think about
I think, look, I think at the days of the political superstars, which James and Paul and others were, on our side have kind of gone away, and Rove was well branded. James does a lot of speeches with him. He had a candidate that fit this, like, had grown up, obviously you talked about sort of in the local,
right.
A lot of talented political. I think that the barrier to entry is just not as high as it was anymore, and that's good. We need more talent on the field. As a hard of a time as I give James as he gets up from the chair, he and Paul are the most talented people I've ever worked with in politics. And I think that Mary Madeline, James's wife, gave me advice when I worked for them 20 years ago, that you could either be brilliant, and she said Lee Atwater was brilliant. She worked with him, famous Republican. Or you could do everything, and she said James was brilliant, which I actually agree with. Or you could do everything on a campaign. You could be well-rounded. And I think the talent in our party now is able to do that. And so you're getting people, that I don't agree with everything that AOC does, but I agree that she is a powerful messenger and has some skills that you can replicate. So the barrier to entry on our side isn't very hard. And on their side, luckily, it's really diffused too. I don't think there's many more, superstar campaign managers in a way. And James and Paul have had more longevity in this business than really anyone that we've ever seen.
I know Karl pretty well. And it is correct. He was a very smart guy. He couldn't do anything about Trump. But, he can't stand Trump. He has to operate in a pretty confined space. Of course, the Bushes detest Trump more than anybody in the world. But, when Trump came through, he just ran over the whole operation. And it seems to be now that he's run over him, he's backing his car, his car up to run over him again. But, and Bradley is right. It's become more diffusion, probably for good reason. And the kind of superstar, household name political operative is, probably not going to happen again. I just was lucky that I came on at the right time.
That's great. Well, thank you both for everything you've done. I know we're about to end our time together, and there were a lot of questions, unfortunately, we couldn't get answered, but we'd love to have you all back at a later time to follow up on some of these questions. Let's end on a note of inspiration, right? I think there are those of us here in Virginia that stay concerned, right? Youngkin may have more grand political ambitions, right? I know we had a question about whether or not you all think Youngkin would run for president and be successful. But can you talk a little bit about that and energize those joining us this morning and those that will watch this webinar here later this week and this weekend about what we should do now, both at home and our community and nationally, to make sure that we can address these really important issues that we've talked about and energize voters, because that's really what it comes down to.
He may run for president. He will not be nominated. I mean, he's already underwater in Virginia. I mean, you pull that act one time and he came up at the perfect time, when the political climate was, which is, I think, a blue state still, deep purple. And he caught an inside straight. That's not likely. He's not going to fit. But I mean, DeSantis and those kind of people. Rick Scott's going. That's going to be. By the way, you want the coming mashup of all mashups? Yeah. It's going to be Rick Scott and DeSantis in the 2024 primaries. You're going to have two Floridians running for president. That's what I think, and I think it's going to be a delight to see.
Yeah, I agree with James. I do think he has national aspirations. I think he'd find it a tough time. It's easy to look, when you're on success. I'll steal something from James that I think everybody can relate to here. I think Democrats, donors, activists, community folks, it doesn't matter who you are. This is solely stolen from him, I will say, is stop trying to win arguments and start trying to win elections. And you can win elections by, supporting candidates. You can win elections by running for office. We're seeing more people run for office. One of the more encouraging pieces from the Democratic Party, we work a lot with Run for Something, I just know who they are, but you got to have somebody on the field. I mean, look, we're in Virginia in 2017. Luckily, we had a lot of people on the field and some of that carried over. We won by more than we thought, and that helped us. And so the third thing is, there is no barrier to entry to go create your own wave. And, we have a $100 million super PAC. That's great. You could go have a $150,000 super PAC or independent effort trying to change the complexion of a school board or a delegate race and probably be really effective. So you can get, unfortunately, because of Citizens United, you can get in the game pretty quickly. And I think that's part of it. You got to fight to win. And we can't get discouraged by, oh my God, we're headed to doom. We're headed to doom. Sure. But things change. And, 4 years ago, if we were on this call and I told you that we would have 2 Democratic senators in the state of Georgia, we'd all think we're nuts. And here we are. So I think you've got to give ourselves some opportunities to win, even though the road ahead looks challenging. Politics is up and down. It never is as good as it seems. It's never as bad as it seems. So that's where I would leave.
Absolutely. And also, we have a real chance in the Senate, even though it's a bad year. The Senate map is pretty good for us. It's awful in 2024. I'd say as business people, donate and get involved, but get involved where you're going to make a difference. All right, not where it's going to make you feel morally superior, but where you can get better candidates who can win a race. And again, it's the Amy McGrath Secretary of State conducting them, that you got to be more of a Secretary of State party.
That's right. Well, that is a great point to end on, which is get involved where you can make a difference. Thank you both so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Y'all have a great Friday.
Y'all too. Yeah. You're my two favorite LSU Tigers.
All right. Stick Carl, Louisiana.
Both. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.